Today, I want to talk about 3 violins, all Stradivari models. Now on the surface, you might think they look quite similar, but as soon as you start to play them, you can immediately tell that they each have their own distinct personality. Along the way, we're going to explore why violin makers today are still using Stradivari as their inspiration, what they're actually copying and where they can be creative, and lastly, a short history of Stradivari himself. So, let's get started. In front of me, I have 3 contemporary violins, all modeled after Stradivari. I will play a short excerpt on each one in a second, but before that, I thought it'd be worth discussing why makers still copy Strad. There are a few reasons, but the main one is that they're the most revered, sought-after instruments in the world. Stradivari instruments have a very special combination of qualities that is incredibly hard to find all together in one violin. They project really well in a hall. They respond very quickly under the bow. They're usually very even across all 4 strings. And importantly, they have this vocal singing quality that players love. If you're a maker today, you could spend your whole life reinventing the wheel, experimenting with different proportions and models, or you can start from something that has been tested for centuries on the best stages in the world and add your own voice to it. I will now play on all of these so you can see how they relate and how they differ from each other. Even with these short excerpts, you can hear that they share many qualities that make a violin good. Focus and clarity, projection, rich tone, etc. That is a key point. Makers are not copying Stradivari because they lack ideas. They're using his models because they're an incredibly reliable framework that allows them to express their own ideas about sound. When a maker says, "This is a Strad model," what does that really mean? It's not just a vague tribute. There are some very concrete things they pay attention to. The outline and proportions, basic shape of the body, the length of the back, and the widths of the upper, middle, and lower bouts. That all affects how the violin feels into the left hand. It also plays a big role in how the instrument resonates. The arching is the curve of the top and back plates. Stradivari experimented a lot with arching over his lifetime. Golden period Strads tend to have quite refined, efficient arching that gives a lot of clarity and projection. If a maker today copies those curves very precisely, they're really trying to recreate that balance of power and brilliance. Now, the shape, spacing, and angle of the F-holes affects both the look and the acoustics. Stradivari F-holes are quite elegant and very consistent. Makers will often copy these very closely for their acoustic properties and also because they're a big part of the aesthetic. Scroll and stylistic details are where the personality really shows. Some makers will reproduce a specific Strad scroll, others will use a Strad body, but a scroll that reflects their own style. Sometimes they'll even leave their own gouge marks in there. Now that is what they copy, but let's talk about where they take liberties, because that is where it gets quite interesting. For instance, these 3 instruments are all Strad models, but the makers have made different choices. For example, in this violin over here, the maker chose to make a new-looking instrument. So the outline and proportions follow Stradivari very closely, but with a more contemporary feel to the varnish, much like original Strads would have looked when they were made. Here in the middle, the maker chose quite an interesting arching. It's flatter towards the edges and then curves quite steeply in the middle. This is something that will definitely affect the sound. And in this violin, it gives it a very warm and broad tone while maintaining that Stradivari type projection and power. Lastly, we have a very precise style, like the first one, but this time the makers chose to go with an antique look. Antiquing is a practice that was popularized by Violin in the 19th century, and nowadays, many players prefer this look. Let us know your thoughts on antiquing versus new in the comments. So what freedoms can makers take? Well, they can tweak the arching and thicknesses slightly to favor warmth or brilliance. They can also use it to adjust the response time. They can also choose different varnish recipes that affect the final sound and final look of the instrument. And of course, they can decide how far they want to go with the antiquing or whether to keep the violin looking more new, as with this violin here. The important thing is that they're not just tracing an outline, they're using Stradivari as a point of departure. Now let's take a brief look at who Stradivari was. Antonio Stradivari worked in Cremona in northern Italy during the late 17th and early 18th century. His career spanned roughly 70 years, which is an enormous amount of time for one maker to be active. People often divide his work into a few periods: the early years, where you can see more influence from Niccolò Amati; the very famous Golden Period, which is roughly the first 2 decades of the 1700s, which produced many of the most celebrated Strads we know today; and then the later period, which is from the 1720s to 1737. During his lifetime, Stradivari was already highly respected, but his instruments really began to gain legendary status in the 19th and early 20th centuries. That's when great soloists started touring the world, playing in bigger halls, and people realized that these instruments had a very special power and carrying quality. Today, Stradivari is the most relevant violin maker of all time for 3 big reasons. He's a reference for sound. When a soloist says they are looking for a new violin, they might say, "I want something that sounds like a good Strad." Even if they're buying a contemporary violin, Stradivari is often a mental benchmark. In summary, makers still use Stradivari models because they work. They offer a proven platform for power, clarity, and versatility. What they copy can be very specific: outline, arching, F-hole, scroll, etc. But within that, there can be a lot of room for personality. Stradivari himself is not just a historical figure. He shapes how we build, how we listen, and how we judge violins today. I would love to know, as you were listening, which one of these 3 violins you preferred. Let me know in the comments which one you liked and why. And if you enjoyed this sort of deep dive into specific models and makers, subscribe to this channel, and we'll keep exploring the world of fine instruments together. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.